Okay, so here we have a web service, right, that is exposing a data model, right, that allows us to retrieve all the users in a JSON format, right. So what we'd like to be able to do is retrieve this data programmatically from JavaScript, from a browser, from some code that is running on the browser. Once we have this array, iterate over it, and then populate the user interface, right. So let's see how we can do that. All right, so from WebSphere, let's go back to where we were doing this by hand, right? Where we had a hard-coded user array, and we wanted to render this. So how do we do that? All right, so what we could do, first let's clean this up a little bit. What we're going to do here is we'll definitely need the body because we will need to be able to add elements in that body, right? So let's declare that, and I'm going to put it and declare it here. So I'll declare it here, but I'm going to actually retrieve it in main. So I'm going to grab the body. I don't really need the title, red, green. I'm just going to remove all that, right? Template. I do need the templates, right? So let's declare that too. Let's see. It'll be var template, and this will be the template. Okay, I don't need the users because we're going to get our own users. We'll put this for loop perhaps inside of a function that we can call, and maybe say render users, right? And users will be will pass users somehow to this function, and this function will iterate over the users, right? Adding all the elements in there. Okay, let's see. That's a template. This is template as well, right? That's what we're going to clone. We don't really need to print a user. Clone. Okay. All right. So how do we fetch the user? How do we fetch the user? So basically, what we'd like to be able to do is go fetch that URL. We have the URL. The URL is which one? It's this one, right? So we have the URL. That is the URL. I want to use that and programmatically go and fetch that data. Okay. Regenerate a GET request out there, right? So one of the easiest ways to do that is to use the function fetch. Fetch will do what it suggests, right? It will fetch that data given the URL that you provide. Right? So we can put this in quotes, and it will fetch it for us. And let's see what it returns. Var users. So we think we can say console log users. Let's see what happens here. Let's go back to our client. Let's make this a little smaller, and let's look at the network. The network shows you all the communication that goes back and forth between the browser and the server. So let's refresh. Notice what happened here. It fetched jQuery from jQuery's CDNs. It fetched the template. It fetched Bootstrap. It fetched the controller. It fetched Angular. What? And notice that it also did. There's our API. See that API? It's coming back as the array that we want. See that? It's the URL, API user get. Right, and that's what the response was from the browser. That's what the browser returned. Right, if we step through the code, and we put a breakpoint right here because notice what happens. Right, this user actually must have printed to the console. We printed the console. Let's look at the console. Well, it's not what we expected, huh? Now, we would have expected that as the network says, that's what came back from the server, an array. Instead, what was printed in the console is not the array. Right? Instead, it's this promise thing. What is that? So what happens here is that JavaScript has one thread. Right? It's the only thread that you get. The browser has tons of threads, right? But the JavaScript is only one of them. So we have to take care of that one thread. We have to make sure that that thread does not block, right? That somehow it doesn't get busy doing things that it blocks the entire application, that it doesn't respond to the user as they click or tap or try to interact with the application, right? What typically happens that what we'd like to be able to do is to make any network connections that might be risky, right? That we might block waiting for that request to come back because the server's busy or it's not responding in time, right? What we'd like to be able to do is, hey, I would like to do that asynchronously. I don't want to do that synchronously. I don't want to call and just wait until that response comes back, right? So what the idea is to instead create a mechanism that can delegate that job to the browser, right? And say, hey, browser, you handle that, right? Because I'm only one thread. You have tons of threads, right? You do this all day. You download images and videos and all these files simultaneously. You know how to handle threading, right? Go and fetch this for me, right? And then at some point, notify me when you got the response back, okay? And that's exactly what the browser comes back with. It says, here's a promise, right? I'm on it, okay? I went to fetch it. You go do whatever else you wanted to do. Go animate the cats or something, or change the colors or the ads or whatever. Do whatever you typically do. I'll go get busy and fetch that data for you, okay? And here instead I'll give you a promise that at some point, hopefully in a little bit, right, I will notify you that the data came back, okay? Right, so that's what you really get, a promise. You don't really get the data. You get a promise that at some point I'm going to call you back. I'll call you right back, right? Right, so what we get, we don't get the users. Instead, we get a promise. You get a promise. And the promise, we can use the promise to register with the promise and say that object, the promise object, provides a function that allows us to register for a callback, saying when you get the data, when the server finally responds, right, call me back and call this function, right, and pass me the data in that function. Make sense? To register for that callback, the function is called then, meaning after it comes back, I want this to happen afterwards. Then once the promise is fulfilled, then this should happen, right? And what do? We're going to pass it to the render users. Call the render users function and pass whatever came back to the render users, right? And we'll put a breakpoint here. So let's refresh. Let's go to the source, and let's put a breakpoint to the render users and see what came back in these users. Let's refresh. Let's see at the users. And the users is still not exactly what we want. It's a little better. It's not just a promise. This needs to be parsed and converted into the right data type, which is JSON. So typically what we want to actually do is to do the parsing. We want users here. So let's do that. What we'll do is that before we pass it on to the render users, we'll pass it through an anonymous function. We'll pass it through an anonymous function, which will receive the response, the raw response, and return the response.json, parsed as JSON. We'll convert the response into a JSON object. How am I going to put it back into the data? Wait a minute. Return. Oh, okay. I can do this again. Render users. Oops. Let's see. Put a breakpoint there. Users. Okay. Finally, we got an array. Right. We got an array of our data. So it's been converted. It has been into a JSON from the response. And now we have the data that we want, Ada and Bob. And if we continue, there's Ada and Bob. Right, that's our data that came back from the server, Ada and Bob. And we can add many more folks on the user. Maybe we can add here A, B, C, Charlie, Garcia. This would be Charlie. So let's execute that. Has exceeded. Where? What do you mean has exceeded? Oh, from my application? It's another connection? I have to kill this again? Really? That's annoying. AWS, yeah. I wasn't having these problems last semester with AWS. Actually, you know what? Let's get this form working. Let's insert using the form. All right, so let's do that. Let's work on that next.